Welcome back, ScreenCrush. I am Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in House of the Dragon, Episode 3. Last week, we skipped over the sweet new opening title sequence, so this week I wanted to briefly go over it. Now, other really great channels like Heavy Spoilers and New Rockstars have already broken this opening down, so I'm going to shout out some of their observations as I go along. Well done, boys! The opening title sequence depicts the Targaryan family tree flowing on Viserys' model of Old Valyria. That's the ancestral Targaryan home. The flowing of the blood represents this family bloodline, but also the Targaryan blood that's been shed by other Targaryens. The first dial, which by the way, the dials are lined with dragon scales, this first dial represents Aegon the Conqueror. It depicts Dragonstone, the Targaryan family home that was forged by the magic of dragons. So the dragons flying around Dragonstone might be depicting this forging of the castle, or they could be fighting one another, foreshadowing the Dance of the Dragons that this series is building toward. Now notice that any dial who represents a ruler bears a crown, much like the sigil of House Baratheon was altered to have a crown stag once Robert became king.
Sigil, a stag, a crowned stag, now that Robert's king.
This dial represents Aegon the Conqueror, the first king of Westeros, and then its flooding represents his death. Erik Voss at New Rockstars pointed out here that the blood flows past this carving of dragons burning up infantry, probably depicting Aegon's conquest. It then flows into his two sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya. Now Visenya had a son named Maegor the Cruel, who was mentioned in episode 1.
Daemon would be a second Maegor, or worse.
And Rhaenys' son was Aegon's true heir, Aenys. At least I think that's how you pronounce it. Next, the line travels to my favorite king of Westeros, Jaehaerys, the Old King, and notice that his crown matches the one that he wears in this show, and also the one that Viserys also wears. Jaehaerys and his sister Alysanne had 9 children, depicted by the 9 bloodlines which branch out like a tree. Only time the Targaryen bloodline actually branches. The rest of the time it's a loop more closed off than the hosts in Westworld. Jaehaerys' 2 oldest sons, Aemon and Balon, both died young, and they're depicted by these 2 drowned seals. Then you'll notice that we have to wait a while to see who is king, because their deaths created the question of succession. That was what the Great Council was for at the start of episode 1. Jaehaerys' next in line would have been his daughter Rhaenys, who is depicted here as flowing toward this blue seahorse, the symbol of her husband, Lord Corlys Velaryon. So then the chosen king is Viserys, and notice that his wife's symbol is drowning immediately as she died in the first episode. From there, one bloodline splits off from Viserys that flows out of frame toward Alicent Hightower, who will bear his son Aegon, who we meet in this episode. Erik Voss pointed out that this flows toward a green wall. Now this is the color that the Hightowers often wear, and at court, the people who side with Lady Alicent later in the series are called Greens. We actually see the Hightower symbol here before the blood flows into the symbol of Princess Rhaenyra, and notice that the seal here is the same as the Valyrian steel necklace that Daemon gave her in episode 1.
Do you know what it is?
Valyrian steel.
Heavy Spoilers pointed out that all the symbols are drowned in the order that they die, which is a very cool detail. Next, the camera dramatically goes under a carving of a dragon ruling over the houses of Westeros. Very hard to depict the house sigils here, but this one is definitely a Lannister. And after we dive into a river of blood, the opening ends with all of these bloodlines flowing into a fiery Targaryen seal inside the model of Old Valyria. And I just love the Valyrian language. One of the things I love about this show is how it does such a wonderful job creating these languages that sound so real. Makes me wish I could learn Old Valyrian. Well, you can't learn Old Valyrian because it's made up, but you can learn a real language with Babbel. They're the sponsor of this video. In just 2 weeks, I am taking a vacation to Italy for the very first time. Luckily, I have Babbel to teach me the basics so I don't walk around like this.
Does anyone here speak English?
I've been using lessons that are specifically made for traveling. For example,
Sono di Palermo e voi siete di Bologna.
Sono di Palermo e voi siete di Bologna. That means I am from Palermo and are you from Bologna? And I love the way they break up the lessons just like that in small bites, so eventually you compile them into a working knowledge of the language. See, Babbel helps you to start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. So if you've always wanted to learn a new language or meet people who speak another language but you were too intimidated, then Babbel is the perfect app for you. And if you use the link in the description to sign up, you get 60% off your subscription. See, Babbel uses these short 10-minute lessons that are made by actual language teachers, not some AI or an algorithm. And it really works. University studies have shown that 15 hours of Babbel equals a semester of college Spanish, and they offer lessons in 14 different languages. Babbel has a few different subscriptions to choose from, including a lifetime subscription. So if you're interested in learning a new language, then this is a great opportunity to try it out. Click on my link in the description or scan this QR code to get 60% off Babbel today. Back to the Easter eggs. The episode begins with the burning flag of House Valyrian. So this house, along with the Targaryans, are the last surviving houses of Old Valyria, and its leader, Corlys Velaryon, made himself incredibly wealthy by building up a massive private fleet and trading with Essos, that's the continent to the east. But now, 3 cities of Essos, Myr, Lys, and Tyros, have formed an alliance called the Triarchy, which actually is like ruled by a council of 33 magistrates who don't ever really agree on anything, so this alliance doesn't like last too long in the lore of Game of Thrones. I think it's like 40, 50 years. The reason Corlys is so worried about the Triarchy now is because their combined fleet is now the greatest power in the Narrow Sea, which threatens his wealth and power base. So I'm going to explain this opening battle and what's at stake. Look, I'm sorry if some of this is old news to you guys, but I'll try to be brief if you're like a huge Wiki Ice and Fire fan. So the Triarchy have invaded these islands called the Stepstones, which actually used to be a land bridge between the 2 continents, which was called the Arm of Dorne. The Stepstones were always a haven for pirates. So actually, the Westeros lords were kind of happy when the Triarchy drove them out.
Well, that sounds suspiciously like good news, Lord Corlys.
But then the Triarchy started to act like pirates themselves, charging heavy tolls, raiding ships, and enslaving and selling women. The villain in this episode, the Crab Feeder, is a Myrish captain named Kragas Drahar. So Corlys Velaryon would love to control the Stepstones for himself, so he can reopen a free shipping lane to Dragon Bay. Sorry, at this point it's Slaver's Bay, and to the other parts of Essos. Daemon shows up on his dragon Caraxes, eager to prove that he's more than just a king that never was. Also, the Stepstones offer Daemon a place to take out his aggression like they're the Georgie of Westeros. But here's the thing, guys. The Stepstones suck. They're just porous rocks that aren't good for growing anything. They can't build anything on them because they're too small. But they are great rocks for hiding in, like so much Wolverines. And then we go from Daemon burning men alive to a different roasted feast, one celebrating an upcoming hunt for King Viserys to celebrate Aegon II's second name day. This is a great way to express how very different Viserys is from his brother Daemon. Daemon loves to get in there, he loves to fight and kill, while Viserys is like more soft-hearted. And, as we see later, he needs someone to hold down an animal before he's even a match for it. Alicent has given him a son, Aegon II, named after Viserys' great-grandfather, Aegon the Conqueror. You'll remember that there was another Aegon in Game of Thrones. That's Aegon Targaryen, the 6th of his name, aka Jon Snow. And by the way, remember Aegon's dream that Viserys talked about in episode 1?
And if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne. A king or queen, strong enough to unite the realm against the cold and the dark.
It does turn out that Aegon was right, except they took a different Aegon, this Aegon, to unite the realms against the darkness. Curl. Yeah, it is. Next, we see Otto Hightower, Hand of the King, talking to his brother, Lord Hightower. Remember what Daemon said about Otto.
A second son who stands to inherit nothing he doesn't seize for himself.
So Otto seems like he's scheming for power, but really, he's more of a Littlefinger, someone who started with nothing and has nothing to lose. And now, he's the king's father-in-law. So Otto is angling for Prince Aegon, his grandson, to inherit the throne, because this will increase his own standing. Tywin Lannister tries to bring the king news from the Stepstones, and he doesn't want to hear it.
Not today, Tywin.
Now, in the book, Viserys' reign was marked by feasts and pleasantries like this, and he always wanted to avoid conflict and keep the peace, which actually only ended up delaying the bloodshed.
So he was the James Buchanan of Westeros.
Oh my god, exactly! How did you know that?
I read.
Very good. So, Viserys is distracted because his daughter is not around, and she isn't taking much interest in court for reasons that we're going to find out later. Rhaenyra's ex-best friend, Alicent, goes to find her, and look, small detail here, I love how there are flourishes around the castle like these dragon heads on the walls. Robert Baratheon would have had all of these decorations removed when he became king because he hated the Targaryens.
I'll kill every Targaryen I get my hands on.
Alicent knew that Rhaenyra would be in the Godswood because this is where they read their stories together when they were younger.
What's a Godswood?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I really should have mentioned this in like episode 1. A Godswood is a place set aside in most Westeros castles where people from the north can come and pray to the old gods. Notice they're sitting under a weirwood tree like we've seen a few times in Game of Thrones. So, back in the day, the Children of the Forest inhabited all of Westeros, and they lived in and amongst these magic trees. Then, when the first men came, they made war against the children and cut down most of these weirwood trees, but a few remain, kind of like chapels inside of these castles, for the men who still worship these old gods. There's a bard who's finishing a song called Under the Dragon's Eye.
Under the dragon's eye.
Which she insists on hearing again.
Play it again.
Yeah, I got the feeling this catchy tune could be another, Neat costume detail, Rhaenyra's shoulder pads and arm braces are cut into dragon scales. She's mad at Alicent because it's actually totally weird when your best friend gets it on with your dad.
Just don't f***
my dad, all right?
I want to your dad.
Oh, really?
But also, she's jealous of her half-brother and is constantly afraid that she will be supplanted by a man. I mean, after all, Rhaenys warned her this would happen in the very first episode.
Men would sooner put the realm to the torch than see a woman ascend the Iron Throne.
Remember this fear of Rhaenyra's for later in the season. Now, one thing the show has not done a great job of is showing just how loved Rhaenyra is by the people. They call her the realm's delight, and she's visited most of Westeros on dragonback tours with her mom when she was young, like when she visited Casterly Rock.
Once, on tour with my mother when I was young. Honestly can't recall much of that either.
So the family rides off to a hunting party, and back in the day when the aristocracy went on a hunt, it was a party. The kings would take hundreds of people with them, throw a feast just like the one we see here. In fact, George R.R. Martin, author of Game of Thrones, once said that he regretted that in the first season of Game of Thrones they didn't have the budget to show the large hunting party of Robert Baratheon, before he was killed by a boar. But Rhaenyra's not really into all of this and doesn't have a taste for the hunt.
Boars screw like children when they're being slaughtered. I find it discomforting.
She doesn't have a taste for violence now, but as we'll see, circumstances can force her to change, and she can be violent when she must. Now, we do see a few important families at the party who are going to become important later on, so just keep an eye on them. These are the Strongs, and we've already met their patriarch, Lionel. He's the member of the small council who 100% looks like he belongs in a Walmart and not ruling as master of laws. Seriously, add a Bengals hat onto this guy and it looks just right.
We have shots fired!
Shots fired.
Just kidding, those are my people. Lionel does give Viserys some sound advice in this episode that is not at all self-serving.
It would seem to me the best match for Rhaenyra is the son of the sea snake, Seleno.
And the king also mentions that maybe Strong would want Rhaenyra to marry his son.
You believe that your son, Sir Harwin Breakbones, the strongest knight in the Seven Kingdoms, is the best match for Rhaenyra.
Who is a character that, in the books is very important later on. I don't expect you to remember all of this for the test or anything, but later on, when we do meet this guy, you'll be like, oh yeah, Ryan told me about that guy, that Breakbones guy, he was important. Other things to note around the party, Otto's house sigil on his chest looks like the tower of the Citadel of Old Town. That's where the training center for the Maesters is, and it's also where Otto is from. And his chain even kind of looks like it's made like a Maester's chain. And this painting behind Viserys is your mom. So Rhaenyra overhears a bit of court gossip.
What happened to Lady Joanna? She's to be sold to a pillow house in the Free Cities, if you believe the rumors.
Okay, so here's what she's talking about. The Triarchy seized a ship and kidnapped a young noblewoman from House Swan named Johanna Swan. They're from the Stormlands, where Robert Baratheon is from. Joanna's stingy uncle refused to pay the ransom to the Lycius raiders, so she was sold to a pillow house where she just basically a few years later ends up running the joint, and she ends up also kind of running the whole city, and she was nicknamed the Black Swan. Maybe we'll actually see this character appear later in the season. But this ordeal is just another reason why the aristocrats of Westeros want the Stepstones War dealt with. We also meet Larys the Clubfoot, who is the son of the redneck strong guy that I was talking about earlier. Then we have this whole argument about whether or not the crown is actually at war.
The crown is not at war.
The crown is at war, princess.
Which is a lot like this.
I will not risk open war.
Open war is upon you, whether you would risk it or not.
The Stepstones are more of a proxy war. In real life, kind of like
James Buchanan?
No, like Vietnam.
Darn it.
I know, buddy, but look, not every historical metaphor is about James Buchanan. Good job, though. High five. Rhaenyra is being schmoozed by Jason Lannister, whose twin brother sits on the King's Council, even though I bet that we never actually see these twins in the same place at the same time. He talks about the wine that's made in Lannisport, that is the main city in his region where their stronghold, Casterly Rock, sits. And of course, we also saw this stronghold in Game of Thrones. So, you remember the Lannisters from Game of Thrones, right? They're all either fighters, thinkers, or drinkers. Or, in the case of Tyrion, all three.
That's what I do. I drink. And I know things.
He also mentions
Golden Gallery,
which is basically the treasure room of the Lannisters. Now, you may have noticed a lot of peacock imagery around this hunt. There's peacock statues, peacocks carved into chairs, and even a cutaway to a couple peacocks kicking around. So the peacocks are the sigil of House Serret of Silverhill, which is in the Westerlands and has sworn loyalty to Casterly Rock. So maybe this part of the Kingswood is far west from King's Landing, closer to Lannister territory. Explains why there's so many of them around. Then, the big news.
The Royal Huntsman has sent a report, Your Grace. There's been a sighting of a white hart.
Ah, the white stag, the top prize for any royal hunt, like in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Otto tries to spin this to be all about his grandson as a sign from the gods that he should be named heir. So now the hunting of the white stag is joined to Viserys' choice. If they find the white stag, then the gods want his son to be king. Frankly, look, I think Viserys would have loved it if somebody could have made this choice for him, and that is why he's so willing to believe it's the will of the gods for the white stag to appear.
It's not my wish to command her, Otto. I want her to be happy.
Look, that line is pretty much the reign of King Viserys summed up into one sentence. So, Rhaenyra runs off to be alone with her first world problems, and she's pursued by Sir Criston Cole.
Yeah, what's going on there? They gonna kiss?
No, because he is a member of the Kingsguard, and they are sworn to be chaste. He also mentions a white book.
One day, not so long ago, you held enough power to write my name into the white book.
And that is the book depicting the best knights of the Kingsguard that we did see Brienne update in Game of Thrones. Also, remember, he's the guy who beat Daemon in the tournament in episode 1. Criston goes on to tell us how he's a working class guy from a poor family. Now remember, in episode 1 they tried to discourage Rhaenyra from picking him for the Kingsguard in favor of a knight who had higher standing. So if it weren't for her being pragmatic, then this title would have gone to someone with a wealthy family instead of someone based on merit. Similarly, Jason Lannister assumes that Aegon will be the new heir simply because that's how it's simply always been done in Westeros. Now notice that Viserys also has what's nicknamed the Cat's Paw Dagger. This is the dagger that Littlefinger used to frame Tyrion Lannister for the attempted murder of Bran Stark. Now Sam did find a drawing of this dagger in a very old book, meaning this blade is actually very old. It's probably been in the Targaryen family since the days of Old Valyria. After all, it is made of Valyrian steel. In episode 1, Viserys mentioned the secret mission of the Targaryen kings.
This secret, it's been passed from king to heir since Aegon's time.
And it would make sense if Aegon the Conqueror saw this dagger being used in his dream to end the Long Night, which is why all the king's sons have kept it close to them. Now, of course, we know that Arya Stark was the one who finally used the dagger against the Night King. So, as the men start to talk about who Rhaenyra should marry, Viserys reveals his fatal flaw as king.
It is not my wish to command her, Otto. I want her to be happy.
He's too concerned with the welfare of others and waffles when it comes to making hard decisions, making him the complete opposite of his brother. Otto makes a creepy suggestion.
One closer to home.
Who do you have in mind?
Prince Aegon.
But you know, this is just kind of what the Targaryens did, kind of like the Skywalkers.
Well, I guess you don't know everything about women yet.
This would also mean that Otto's grandson would basically be right next to the throne and maybe, you know, the de facto king. Loras Strong mentions the daughters of the old king
drove him to the edge of madness. His daughters in particular.
Which is very true. One of them even ran off and became a prostitute in Essos. Strong suggests that she pair off with Laenor. That's the son of the sea snake that we actually see later in this episode.
What role have you played in this council, uncle, other than master of complaints?
Enough!
He is the older brother of Rhaenyra, the king's potential wife, last episode.
She is 12.
Both Laenor and Rhaenyra are half Targaryen. Their mom is Rhaenys, the queen who never was, and their dad is the Sea Snake. And that means that they're both dragon riders, riding Vhagar and Sea Smoke respectively. Back in the woods, Rhaenyra is attacked by a wild boar. Just as a couple hundred years later, Robert Baratheon will be killed by a wild boar during his royal hunt. Now, earlier, Rhaenyra shied away from violence, but here we see that when her life is threatened, she will not back down. She will fight back. Now back at the hall, Viserys gets tipsy and rambles about his dream.
When Rhaenyra was a child, I saw it in a dream. A male babe, born to me, wearing the conqueror's crown.
And here's the thing, guys. Targaryens do have prophetic dreams. Aegon dreamed of the Long Night. Daenerys dreamed of the Iron Throne covered in snow. And in the book, she dreamed about a blue rose sticking out from a wall of frozen ice, symbolizing Jon Snow and his true mother, Lyanna Stark. So, was Viserys' dream real, or is he delusional? It's interesting that in the show, they actually show him having doubts, because in the book, he never wavers in his commitment to make his daughter his heir. But the book is written from like a third-hand account by a maester, so we only see what the people in Westeros saw, and like not much information about what happened behind closed doors. So, the episode ends with 3 different kills, all of which say a lot about the people doing the killing. The first kill is Rhaenyra finishing off the boar, but more importantly, it's the animal that she chooses to spare. despair, the white stag. She doesn't need to kill something beautiful to prove that she is strong, but she will kill when it's necessary. The men in the kingdom are all running around looking for this white stag to prove a point, to take away her position, whereas she has just shown that she does not have to prove herself to anyone. She knows who she is. The second kill is from Viserys, basically being peer pressured into poorly killing a stag, which reminded me a lot of this. But this stag is not white, so he might take this as a sign that his son is not actually meant to be his heir. Viserys goes through with the killing even though he pities this beast, because he just wants to make everyone happy. That's actually his biggest flaw. This is also similar to how he doesn't want to send people to fight and die in the Stepstones until his small council pressures him to send ships. So compare all that to the third kill of the episode when Daemon kills the crab feeder. Unlike his brother, Daemon had to do the hunting for himself. He had to embrace violence and put his life on the line to obtain his trophy. But more on that in just a minute. Alicent goes to see her husband, and we hear mentioned
the ladies Lannister and Redwine were quite taken with him.
So the Redwines are from the area called the Reach, and this is the original house of Elena Tyrell.
I made a terrible mistake. I carry it with me every single day. Good.
Also, notice that Viserys' model of Valyria has expanded in the past couple years, a way of showing that he still pines for these better days instead of leading his kingdom forward. He also gives us the best explanation ever for a hangover.
The gods have punished me for my indulgences.
At least the wine was good.
I've been there, my guy. And when Rhaenyra comes to see him, there's a hexagon on the table.
Not the beast!
And finally, let's get back to the Stepstones, where the War Council is placing little pieces on their game board. So this fish piece looks like it represents the Tullys of Riverrun. And you know what? Someone had to actually make all these crab pieces. And I don't mean the prop master on the show. I mean like that's someone's job in this universe. The War Council would have brought along a guy who was like really good at making little statues for this map, because they would need the little statues to represent the crab feeder's forces.
Or, you know, maybe they had them made before they left Westeros.
Yeah, I guess, but they did underestimate the crab feeder's forces, so they probably wouldn't have ordered enough pieces. So I think they had somebody on site to make these pieces.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I like that too.
Well done, high five. Anyways, when Viserys says he's sending ships, Daemon takes this as an insult, because this was his war, his chance to prove that he is the only worthy heir to the throne. So he pulls a Gendry off into enemy territory. After a quick deception, he rips through these soldiers like he's playing this level on easy. But eventually, it's almost game over before more dragons come out to play, mirroring Daenerys' rescue by Drogon hundreds of years later.
Oh yeah, who's riding that dragon?
Actually, Doug, there are like 10 other dragon riders around at this point because there are so many Targaryans. The show has not been really introducing them because they're like slowly reintroducing us to this world. Although it is a little silly that the crab feeder just kind of forgot about the other dragons though. And then, R.I.P. the crab feeder. You looked like a Mad Max character, like you were going to go witness for a Morton Joe. So now, the battle lines are drawing up. Otto versus Rhaenyra, Daemon versus everyone, and Rhaenyra versus her stepmom. Well, that's all the Easter eggs we found, but if you found any, let me know in the comments below, or you can @ me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.